I'll be talking today about how sustainability and safety, we try to secure it for our outsourced fleet within Heineken through connectivity and mainly telematics. I want to start by setting the scene for Heineken. As Stephen said, we're quite an international brewer. We have more than 170 breweries and malteries. We're present in more than 70 countries, and we brew more than 300 blends. So that makes our supply chain and logistics operations quite complicated. And in particular, if I want to zoom in into our logistics setup, you see that we have more than 4 million shipments per year. We cover more than 1 billion kilometers, and we mainly use trucks, and that's heavy-duty trucks for transporting our products. But we also are heavily outsourcing our operations to logistics service providers, and we operate with more than 2,000 LSPs globally. I also wanted to highlight that logistics per se is covering 11% of our carbon footprint, so that's 2.2 million tons of CO2 every year. So it becomes evident that we need to collaborate with our LSPs to bring down the emissions for our logistics operations, but also to create a little bit more safe road safety and safe behavior during our logistics operation. So if I go to the bridge about our sustainable development strategy, you can see that we have several pillars that cover people, planet, and prosperity, which are in line with the UN SDGs. And we have, in particular, the pillar about Drop the C, reducing CO2 emissions and promoting health and safety, which you can see it on the top in purple. If I zoom in again into the Drop the C strategy, of course, this is covering the full value chain and the full company, but in particular for logistics operation, what we do is we offer our operating companies several initiatives where they can, according to their market reality, they can choose what works best for them to be able to bring down those CO2 emissions into their operation. And one of those initiatives is a fuel efficiency program that we run in the company. To talk a little bit about it, the idea or the concept behind it is that we want to influence the driving style of our drivers, whether own or third-party fleet, and also to ensure that the vehicle that is being driven is in optimal state so that it has a good aerodynamic drag, or that we do some preventive maintenance on it to always bring down the fuel consumption. And in this case, for the first part with the driving behavior, we see that telematics plays quite a big role, and to have a connected fleet to be able to see what's happening on the road and how the driver is driving, to be able to analyze how does that correlate to fuel consumption. So that being, is the driver overspeeding? Is he doing any harsh braking and acceleration? Or is there a long time of idling, because that impacts fuel consumption a lot. And of course, the more fuel you consume, the more CO2 emissions you have. So this is a little bit of the concept of what we were thinking at the beginning for a strategy in CO2 emissions reduction. And then the second one is related to safety. And you can see similar components here in our road safety strategy, where we talk about management and where we put policies and standards in place. The driver is exactly what I mentioned before, the driving style and behavior on the road, the vehicle, so to have the optimal state of the vehicle being driven, and of course the journey to have the right conditions on the road and so on, and the consequence of all of these different components of how it could lead to an incident or not. And in our strategy, we want our employees to be, and contractors to be, as safe as possible and to eliminate all the incidents and accidents as much as we can. Having to bridge that. So I've set the scene now of what we were thinking about and what we wanted. So we definitely want to maximize the value with our suppliers and to unlock insights to improve this value that we want to put in place, but to also ensure that our employees have the most safe and sustainable behavior for when transporting our products. And we want to start having a more data-driven decision-making, because it's not enough to just have the insights. It's important to use those insights for decision-making going forward, right? And so how did we want to achieve it? So we decided, as I mentioned before, again, that telematics is important to be able to see the driver behavior data, so to have connected fleet. But also, that's not enough. You also have to use the data to monitor the performance and to create incentive schemes related to it, because that's the only way to really push for more opportunity improvement and to really use the data to improve what we want to achieve, right? And then how did we put it in practice? So as I mentioned before, we want to collaborate with our LSPs. So one way of doing that is also to collaborate with our procurement colleagues and create transport standards where we put minimum requirement of what we want out of our logistics service providers. So we set telematics to be a requirement. We set also certain vehicle engine and age for the vehicles to be also part of the requirement. So now whenever we enter a new tender to contract logistics service provider, we have this set of requirements, and that will enable us to unlock data from them going forward and to be able to use this data for the road safety strategy, but also our drop the C strategy, as I mentioned before. This is the first step, and this we started last year, and we are already starting to see the effects of it in a couple of countries. And then the next step for us would be to start having sort of a telematics data lake, so to capture all the data that is coming from our vehicles, whether owned or third party, into this data lake project, and where we will really use the data to do better decision making and influence use the data to influence the opportunities. So if we see that in certain countries there is a huge issue with, let's say, idling or with the accidents because there is more of speeding, then we are able to tackle it on a, let's say, more specific level. So you're not doing more generic training or more generic way of trying to apply your strategy. You go more into the details and you do a data-driven application of what you want to achieve. And then the third point is that I think it's what Frank was talking about a little bit earlier, that the digitization of transport. I think this is more and more evident that is becoming the future. And we do see that telematics is going to be the backbone to any digital tool that we want to implement in the future to optimize our processes. So we see that if we start implementing it now and asking our logistics service providers to have it, then it will facilitate the future for us and when we want to implement new digital tools. So this is in a nutshell the way of thinking and how we try to apply it. And I thought that just a little bit of an inspiration of the process of inspiration, let's say, because we did start with having telematics in our passenger cars and our own vehicles, and we then expanded it to our third-party logistics. So you can see here it's a little bit of an evidence of why it works, because we do see a drop in road incidents once we started implementing telematics in our passenger vehicles, and we thought that if this is proof enough for us to needing to expanding it to our logistics service provider. And also really last year, we did a couple of, the last 2 years actually, we did a couple of fuel management programs outside of Europe. It's in Burundi and Malaysia, but we saw a big drop in fuel consumption based on telematics data and having driver incentive scheme and awareness and eco-driving training, and we saw a huge drop in fuel consumption. So then here we saw that the opportunity to also expand it to other markets and to start working on it as a global program, because we do see the benefits of having a data-driven fuel program. Well, I spent half an hour talking about this between the first time and the second time, but the main message that I want to keep with everyone is that collaboration across the logistic value chain is key. So as I mentioned before, we have collaboration between the logistics and the procurement function internally, but also we started having more collaboration between us as a shipper and our logistics service provider. And on top of it, to be able to really unlock the value for sustainable development and safety, we need to work together with truck manufacturers and fuel companies, but also with regulatory entities. So the collaboration between all these parties becomes very important, and we do see that connectivity and sharing data among each other is going to be the way for the future. So it's better to start now and jump on that train before it's too late. So this is it for me. There are any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you,
No
Remi.
problem.
Thank you also for respecting the timing. A few questions for you. The first one is that you mentioned on one of the slides that you have put in place some standards with requirements that both within Heineken, but also your supplier fleets, your third-party fleets, should include in the tender exercises. What kind of standards are that? Can you give an example?
So it's a minimum, let's say, it's an internal standard that we use when we are entering a new tender. So you have minimum set of requirements that when entering a tender with logistics service provider that need to be respected. And based on that, you select the winners of that tender. So it's I would say an internal policy.
Okay. Another question is, of course, it's great to see that and for your own fleet and for your third-party fleet that you are using telematics to drive down accidents and incidents to make sure that in terms of fuel efficiency, you have better results. I think that people will be interested to know, how do you keep those third-party fleets in line with your goals and objectives? How do you make them compliant and respect what you would like to achieve?
Yeah, I think putting a lot of clauses in the contracts is one way of ensuring that the LSP understands your strategy and what you want. But then the important part after that is monitoring the performance and creating the right KPIs and targets in place. So a lot of cases we see is that whenever there's a new tender and we have new LSPs joining let's say the logistics team in the operating company, they do some workshops to introduce them to the strategy of Heineken, whether that's safety or sustainable development, but also the actual operational strategy. And then they set some targets and KPIs and evaluate them on a regular basis. And we have, of course, a program internally that we call it LSP management. So this is about collaboration with LSPs and setting the right targets and let's say influencing the relationship on a regular basis, become a positive relationship.
Yeah, you use telematics. Do you use then one and the same system for all the countries where you operate? Are you obliging also your third parties to use that system? How does it work?
No, I think we leave the freedom for third parties to use any telematics that they want, because also sometimes they already have a system, so that's okay. Internally, we try to influence with preferred suppliers, but then we also leave the freedom to countries to use whatever is available in their markets. Because again, if you look at our the size and where we operate, it's impossible to have coverage with one supplier everywhere. So we do leave the freedom to choose whatever is available.
Okay. Final question. If you Oostvogel, a participant, asked a question in the chat. Remi, do you have proof of success of changing behavior? We already saw on one of the slides that due to telematics, there was a serious drop in terms of the accidents, but is there also proof of changing driver behavior? And can you a little bit elaborate on that?
Yes, we have several examples, and one of them is what I've mentioned with Burundi and Malaysia, but we also have other examples. And that's why in one of the slides I also mentioned it's not enough to have telematics and get data. It's important to monitor performance and really have driver incentive schemes. So positive reinforcement for us is very important, because then you are stressing on the right behaviors and eliminating the negative behaviors. So this is really key in our program, and how we see that this is where it unlocks the value, not just the data. The data is the first step because then you're able to analyze, but to unlock the real data is when you bring everyone together and you create a positive atmosphere around the topic. And that's when we really do see human behavior changing.
Okay. And do you use then internal software to collect and analyze all that data?
Yeah. So it's internally collected, and as I mentioned, one of the next steps is to have more of a telematics data lake to bring all this data together. But in general, we collect the data from different suppliers, and we try to help in unlocking the value.
Okay. Remi, thank you very much. Thank you for your presence. Sorry for the technical hiccup.
Okay.
I know that you have a plane to catch, so safe travels.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and hope to meet with you again in one of the upcoming initiatives of Fleet Europe and the Connected Fleets Conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and enjoy the event.
Thank you.